The most dangerous victories are the ones celebrated too soon. The grand Wellington ballroom sparkled beneath towering crystal chandeliers, every polished surface reflecting a carefully crafted illusion of perfection. Soft piano music floated through the air while elegantly dressed guests exchanged confident smiles over glasses of sparkling wine. Every conversation sounded effortless. Every laugh seemed rehearsed. At the center of the magnificent room stood Ethan Collins, looking exactly like the successful man he wanted everyone to admire. His tailored black tuxedo fit flawlessly, his polished shoes reflected the marble floor beneath him, and his right hand rested proudly around the waist of his fiancée, Madison Reed. The brilliant diamond on her finger caught the light every few seconds, almost as if the evening itself had been designed to display it. Ethan enjoyed every glance the ring attracted. He had spent weeks organizing this reunion gala under the respectable excuse of reconnecting with former colleagues, old neighbors, and mutual friends. Very few people knew that the guest list had been assembled with one person in mind: Natalie Brooks, his former wife. The invitation had not been an accident. It had been the final detail in a performance Ethan had imagined countless times. He wanted Natalie to witness everything she no longer had: his new relationship, his growing career, his polished reputation, his perfect future. As guests gathered near the ballroom entrance to welcome late arrivals, the enormous double doors slowly opened. Conversations softened without anyone asking them to. Natalie stepped inside wearing a graceful navy evening dress that favored elegance over extravagance. Her blonde hair rested neatly across one shoulder, and a simple silver bracelet was the only jewelry she wore. She carried no designer handbag covered in recognizable logos, no dramatic entrance, and no attempt to draw attention. Yet somehow the room noticed her immediately. Several guests exchanged curious glances. Some whispered quietly behind polite smiles. Others remembered the divorce that had quietly divided old friendships. In their minds, Ethan had continued climbing while Natalie had simply disappeared. Nobody asked where life had taken her, because most people believed they already knew the answer. Ethan spotted her almost instantly. Satisfaction flashed across his face before he gently squeezed Madison's hand. Together they crossed the ballroom with confident smiles, attracting nearby conversations as naturally as magnets. "Natalie," Ethan said warmly, extending both kindness and superiority in the same carefully measured tone. "I am honestly surprised you decided to come." Natalie met his eyes with calm composure. "Thank you for inviting me." Madison smiled brightly before lifting her left hand just enough for the engagement ring to catch another beam of chandelier light. "It is wonderful to finally meet you," she said sweetly. "Ethan has told me so much about you." The words sounded gracious, yet something beneath them carried the quiet confidence of someone convinced she had already won. Ethan chuckled softly. "Madison and I have been planning the wedding for months. Everything has been moving faster than either of us expected." Several nearby guests congratulated the couple. One admired the ring. Another complimented the upcoming ceremony. Ethan accepted every compliment with practiced humility while occasionally glancing toward Natalie, waiting for disappointment to appear somewhere behind her blue eyes. Instead, she smiled gently. "Congratulations. I truly hope the day is everything you both want." Her voice remained steady. There was no bitterness, no regret, no jealousy. The reaction confused Ethan far more than visible heartbreak ever could have. He had imagined this moment ending differently. Natalie was supposed to look uncomfortable. She was supposed to realize what she had lost. Instead, she stood peacefully beneath the crystal lights as though none of it threatened her happiness anymore. Guests quietly watched the exchange, unsure what to make of her calm confidence. Ethan responded by wrapping his arm a little tighter around Madison, laughing a little louder, and speaking a little more proudly about his recent promotion and future plans. The entire evening felt like a stage built for his success, and he believed everyone inside the ballroom had already accepted him as the undeniable winner. What Ethan could not possibly know was that the most important guest of the evening had not arrived yet, and the story he believed he was directing was already beginning to slip beyond his control. After Ethan and Madison moved on to greet another circle of guests, the conversations around Natalie slowly resumed, but they no longer sounded quite the same. Curious eyes continued following her wherever she walked. Some people offered polite smiles out of courtesy. Others whispered quietly, believing she could not hear them over the music. She looks different. She seems calmer than I expected. I thought this evening would be difficult for her. Natalie heard enough to understand what everyone believed. In their minds, she was the woman who had been left behind while Ethan had continued climbing toward the perfect life. She felt no desire to correct them. There had been a time when misunderstandings kept her awake at night, when she desperately wanted people to know the whole story. That version of herself no longer existed. She accepted a glass of sparkling water from a passing server and thanked him with a warm smile before slowly walking toward the enormous windows overlooking the city skyline. Thousands of lights stretched across the horizon beneath the clear evening sky, each one belonging to someone living a life the ballroom would never fully understand. The peaceful view reminded her that appearances had always been unreliable. A marriage that looked perfect from the outside had quietly fallen apart long before anyone noticed. A woman who seemed to have lost everything had quietly discovered herself after everyone stopped paying attention. Behind her, Ethan continued entertaining guests with polished confidence. He laughed easily while describing recent business achievements, speaking proudly about his promotion, future investments, and wedding plans. Madison stood comfortably beside him, her engagement ring attracting compliments almost every few minutes. They looked exactly like the couple people admired on magazine covers. Several former friends drifted naturally toward Ethan, congratulating him on everything he had accomplished. Only one or two eventually wandered over to Natalie, offering carefully measured sympathy disguised as conversation. "It is nice to see you again," one woman said gently. "You have been keeping busy?" Natalie smiled. "Life has been good to me." The woman seemed almost surprised by the answer. "Really?" Natalie nodded softly. "I have learned to appreciate simple things much more than I used to." There was nothing dramatic about her response, yet it carried a quiet confidence that required no explanation. The conversation ended pleasantly, but the woman walked away looking thoughtful rather than satisfied. Across the ballroom, Ethan noticed the exchange and felt a faint sense of frustration he could not explain. Natalie was supposed to appear uncomfortable. She was supposed to struggle beneath the weight of old memories. Instead, she carried herself with the peaceful certainty of someone who no longer measured happiness by public approval. He watched her standing alone near the windows, expecting loneliness, but somehow she never looked lonely. She simply looked comfortable in her own company. That realization unsettled him more than he cared to admit. Madison slipped her hand into his. "Everything all right?" she asked. Ethan forced an easy smile. "Of course." Yet his eyes returned toward Natalie almost immediately. Something about her calm expression made the carefully planned evening feel less satisfying than he had imagined. It was as though the reaction he had hoped to witness had quietly disappeared before she even arrived. Natalie glanced briefly at the elegant watch on her wrist before lowering her hand again. She did not seem impatient. She did not send a message or check her phone repeatedly. Instead, a gentle smile appeared across her face for only a moment before fading back into quiet composure. Nobody noticed the subtle change except Ethan. He followed her gaze toward the grand entrance, expecting another late guest to wander inside. The doors remained closed. Nothing appeared unusual. Still, an unshakable feeling settled somewhere deep inside him, whispering that the evening had not unfolded completely yet. While everyone else believed they already understood Natalie's story, someone was steadily making his way toward the ballroom, completely unaware that his arrival would quietly rewrite every assumption inside the room. Natalie remained near the tall windows while the evening unfolded around her, allowing the soft melody of the piano to blend into the quiet rhythm of her thoughts. The ballroom no longer felt intimidating. 2 years earlier, a room filled with familiar faces would have made her heart race, desperate to prove she had not failed. Tonight, she no longer carried that burden. She watched the reflections of the chandeliers shimmer across the glass and found herself remembering a very different evening, one spent inside a modest one-bedroom apartment after the divorce papers had become final. The silence in that apartment had seemed endless. Half of the shelves were empty. The dining table had been sold to help pay monthly bills. Every room echoed with memories that no longer belonged to anyone. She had stood in the tiny kitchen holding a mug of inexpensive coffee, wondering how an entire future could disappear inside a single season. Friends gradually stopped calling. Couples she once spent holidays with quietly drifted toward Ethan, convinced it would be less awkward that way. Invitations disappeared. Group messages grew silent. Even people who meant well often looked at her with the uncomfortable sympathy reserved for someone they believed had lost everything. At first, those moments hurt. Then they became strangely freeing. With no expectations left to satisfy, Natalie slowly began rebuilding her life one ordinary day at a time. She accepted freelance graphic design projects that paid just enough to cover rent. She spent evenings taking online business classes while eating simple dinners at a small wooden desk instead of a dining room table. Every completed project led to another recommendation. Every satisfied client restored a little more confidence. She learned how to celebrate small victories that nobody else noticed. Paying every bill on time became an achievement. Watching the balance in her savings account slowly grow felt more rewarding than any expensive purchase ever had. Saturday mornings became her favorite part of the week. She would walk to the neighborhood coffee shop carrying a notebook filled with ideas for future clients, choosing the same corner table near the front window. No one there knew anything about her past. They simply knew her as the woman who always smiled at the baristas, tipped generously whenever she could, and quietly worked for hours without complaining. Somewhere along the way, she stopped introducing herself as someone's former wife. She became simply Natalie again. The memory faded as another guest approached the ballroom windows to admire the skyline before politely excusing himself. Natalie smiled to herself. None of the people surrounding her tonight had witnessed those quiet mornings, the difficult choices, or the countless moments when she almost doubted herself but kept moving anyway. They only saw the finished version standing confidently beneath elegant chandeliers. Ethan glanced toward her once more from across the ballroom. The more he observed her, the less he understood. She was not pretending to be happy. There was something authentic in the peaceful way she carried herself, something that could never be copied for appearances alone. He found himself wondering what had happened during the years they had spent apart. Who had encouraged her? Who had reminded her to believe in herself again? Those questions settled heavily inside his thoughts because he no longer possessed any of the answers. Natalie quietly looked at her watch once again before lifting her eyes toward the ballroom entrance. This time, the massive doors slowly opened. A tall man in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit stepped inside with calm confidence, pausing first to thank the hostess before accepting directions with a warm smile. He carried no dramatic entrance, no entourage, and no obvious display of importance. Most guests barely noticed him. Natalie did, and for the first time that evening, the gentle smile she wore became unmistakably brighter. The man walked through the ballroom with the quiet confidence of someone who had never needed a grand entrance to command respect. His charcoal suit was impeccably tailored, yet nothing about it demanded attention. His polished shoes reflected the marble floor beneath the chandeliers, and a simple silver watch rested beneath the cuff of his white dress shirt. He paused beside a passing server and accepted a glass of sparkling water with genuine appreciation before thanking him by name after reading the embroidered badge. The young server smiled with pleasant surprise. Few guests had taken the time to notice something so small. Natalie stepped forward, her expression warming in a way nobody had seen all evening. "You made it," she said softly. The man returned her smile. "I promised I would." His voice carried a calm sincerity that immediately dissolved whatever tension remained around her. "I hope I did not keep you waiting." Natalie shook her head gently. "Not at all." For a brief moment, they simply stood together, comfortable inside the silence. They did not rush to fill it with unnecessary conversation because neither of them felt the need to impress the other. Across the ballroom, Ethan noticed the change instantly. The peaceful smile Natalie now wore was different from the polite expressions she had offered everyone else. It reached her eyes. It carried warmth instead of courtesy. Ethan quietly watched as the stranger asked Natalie how her evening had been. She laughed softly before answering. "It has been more interesting than I expected." The man smiled. "I had a feeling it might be." They shared another quiet laugh that sounded effortless, the kind of laughter built from familiarity rather than performance. Madison followed Ethan's gaze. "Is that someone she knows?" she asked. Ethan shrugged, trying to sound unconcerned. "Probably just a friend." Yet something inside him resisted his own explanation. There was an ease between them that could not be faked. The stranger never tried to stand in front of Natalie or dominate the conversation. Instead, he naturally matched her pace, listening carefully whenever she spoke and responding with thoughtful attention. Several nearby guests noticed the pair but quickly dismissed them. One assumed the man worked in finance because of his conservative suit. Another guessed he might be an attorney attending with a client. No one recognized him. No one asked his name. He appeared perfectly ordinary among hundreds of well-dressed professionals enjoying an elegant evening. That anonymity seemed to suit him perfectly. Natalie introduced him to an older couple she had known years earlier. He greeted them warmly, asking thoughtful questions about their grandchildren after hearing them mentioned only once. Within moments, the conversation felt natural, leaving the couple smiling as they walked away. "What a kind gentleman," the woman quietly remarked to her husband. Ethan overheard the comment and frowned without realizing it. He studied the stranger more carefully, searching for something extraordinary. There was nothing obvious. No luxury watch worth discussing. No recognizable designer logo. No attempt to attract attention. The stranger simply stood beside Natalie as though the crowded ballroom had become the most peaceful place in the city. Ethan finally decided to approach. With Madison beside him, he crossed the marble floor wearing the same confident smile that had carried him through countless business meetings. "Looks like you finally found your company for the evening," he said pleasantly. Natalie nodded. "Ethan, Madison, I would like you to meet Benjamin Foster." Benjamin extended his hand, first with quiet confidence. "It is a pleasure meeting both of you." His handshake was firm without being forceful, respectful without becoming formal. Ethan returned it automatically, convinced he was greeting an ordinary professional whose name meant nothing at all. Neither he nor anyone else inside the ballroom realized they had just welcomed the most influential person in the room without recognizing him. Benjamin released Ethan's hand with the same quiet courtesy he had shown everyone else, then turned his attention back to Natalie as though nothing unusual had happened. The brief introduction ended naturally, yet Ethan found himself studying the man more carefully than before. There was something strangely unsettling about meeting someone who appeared completely comfortable without trying to impress anyone. Ethan had spent years learning how to make successful first impressions, but Benjamin seemed completely uninterested in creating one. That confidence felt different. It came from somewhere much deeper than appearance. Wanting to reclaim the center of the conversation, Ethan smiled broadly and gestured toward Madison. "We have been incredibly busy planning the wedding," he said proudly. "The venue is already reserved, and we are looking at a destination ceremony next spring. It has been exciting watching everything come together." Madison admired her engagement ring for a brief moment as another nearby guest complimented the diamond. She thanked them graciously while Ethan continued describing travel plans, luxury accommodations, and the celebration they hoped everyone would remember for years. Benjamin listened politely without interrupting. When Ethan finally paused, Benjamin simply smiled. "That sounds like a wonderful beginning. I hope your day brings both of you many happy memories." There was no envy in his voice, no competition, only sincere kindness. Ethan had expected questions, comparisons, perhaps even admiration. Instead, Benjamin offered nothing more than genuine good wishes. Natalie quietly thanked a passing server for refreshing her sparkling water before glancing toward Benjamin. "Have you had dinner yet?" she asked. Benjamin shook his head with an easy smile. "Not yet. I was hoping we could try the buffet together after the speeches begin. I heard the chef is excellent." Natalie laughed softly. "You always plan your evening around food." Benjamin smiled. "Only because good conversations seem to happen around good meals." The simple exchange made several nearby guests smile without realizing why. There was no performance between them, no carefully rehearsed affection designed for an audience. They behaved like two people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. Ethan noticed the difference immediately. During his marriage, conversations had gradually become schedules, responsibilities, and unfinished discussions about work. Watching Natalie laugh so naturally beside another man awakened a quiet discomfort he had not expected to feel. Hoping to redirect attention once again, Ethan began introducing Madison to several executives gathered nearby, proudly mentioning her background and speaking enthusiastically about his recent promotion. He spoke with polished confidence, occasionally glancing toward Benjamin to measure his reaction. Benjamin simply listened whenever spoken to, answered questions briefly, and always redirected conversations toward the other person rather than himself. One executive asked, "Benjamin, what kind of work keeps you busy these days?" Benjamin smiled thoughtfully before answering, "Mostly helping businesses solve long-term problems and supporting community projects whenever I can." Ethan chuckled politely. "That covers a lot of ground." Benjamin nodded. "Most worthwhile work usually does." The answer sounded so ordinary that everyone accepted it without another question. No one imagined there could be anything extraordinary hiding behind such modest words. Just then, the ballroom lights softened slightly as gentle music faded. Staff members began moving discreetly across the room, adjusting seating arrangements near the stage and quietly speaking into wireless headsets. A few organizers hurried toward the entrance before suddenly changing direction, as though unexpected news had reached them. The master of ceremonies stepped onto the stage with a brighter smile than before and tapped the microphone once to gather everyone's attention. Conversations gradually faded into silence. Ethan straightened his jacket, assuming another sponsor or local executive was about to receive recognition. Benjamin remained completely relaxed beside Natalie, showing no sign of curiosity or anticipation. Natalie looked at him for only a brief moment, and he answered with the smallest reassuring smile. It was a silent exchange so subtle that nobody noticed it, yet within seconds the atmosphere inside the ballroom began to shift in a way that would leave every guest questioning everything they thought they understood about the quiet man standing beside her. The master of ceremonies welcomed everyone with a gracious smile before thanking the donors, volunteers, and community leaders whose generosity had made the annual charity gala possible. Warm applause echoed beneath the crystal chandeliers as guests settled into respectful silence. Candlelight flickered across white linen tablecloths while servers quietly stepped aside, allowing the formal presentation to begin. Ethan folded his hands confidently in front of him, convinced the evening had unfolded exactly as he intended. Madison stood beside him with quiet pride, occasionally adjusting the sparkling engagement ring that had already become one of the most discussed details of the night. Around them, familiar executives exchanged satisfied smiles, expecting another routine ceremony celebrating successful businesses and generous sponsors. Natalie and Benjamin remained near the middle of the ballroom rather than moving toward the reserved tables at the front. Benjamin appeared completely relaxed, listening attentively as the master of ceremonies recognized local organizations and scholarship recipients. He applauded warmly after every announcement, never seeking attention for himself. Natalie noticed that nothing about him changed depending on who occupied the stage. Whether speaking with volunteers or listening to executives, he offered everyone the same genuine respect. That quiet consistency had become one of the many reasons she admired him. As another charitable foundation accepted recognition, a woman wearing an event credential hurried discreetly toward the stage. She leaned close to the master of ceremonies and whispered something into his ear. His pleasant smile widened with unmistakable surprise before he nodded several times. He briefly stepped away from the microphone while organizers near the front exchanged quick glances and spoke softly into wireless headsets. The atmosphere shifted almost instantly. Staff members adjusted several reserved seats that had remained empty throughout the evening. Photographers quietly repositioned themselves near the stage. Security personnel who had been standing near the ballroom entrance suddenly directed their attention toward the center of the room instead. Ethan noticed the unusual activity and smiled with quiet excitement. "Someone important must have just arrived," he whispered confidently to Madison. She straightened her posture and glanced toward the entrance doors, expecting another well-known executive or public figure to appear. Around the ballroom, conversations resumed in hushed speculation. Several guests discreetly adjusted jackets and evening gowns while preparing to greet whoever the unexpected guest might be. Natalie remained perfectly calm. She did not look toward the entrance. Instead, she simply glanced at Benjamin, who returned a gentle smile that carried no trace of anticipation. "Everything all right?" she asked softly. Benjamin nodded. "Everything is exactly as it should be." His answer sounded ordinary enough that no one nearby gave it another thought. A young server approached with a tray of sparkling water. Benjamin accepted a fresh glass, thanked him sincerely, and wished him an enjoyable evening before stepping aside so other guests could be served first. Ethan watched the small interaction without understanding why it bothered him. Benjamin never acted like someone hoping to impress strangers, yet people naturally seemed comfortable around him. The master of ceremonies soon returned to the microphone with renewed enthusiasm. The ballroom gradually fell silent once more. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "before we continue with tonight's program, we have received wonderful news. One of our most generous supporters has unexpectedly joined us this evening, and it is truly an honor to recognize him in person." Excitement quietly spread across the ballroom. Nearly every guest turned instinctively toward the grand entrance, waiting for the distinguished visitor to walk through the doors. Ethan did the same. Madison followed his gaze. Neither of them noticed that every event coordinator, photographer, and senior organizer had already stopped looking at the entrance altogether. Instead, their attention had quietly settled on the calm gentleman standing peacefully beside Natalie, waiting with the same composed smile he had worn since the moment he arrived. The ballroom became so quiet that even the soft hum of the air conditioning seemed louder than before. Every conversation faded into silence as the master of ceremonies smiled toward the center of the room instead of the entrance. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced with unmistakable admiration, "it is my great privilege to recognize a leader whose generosity has quietly transformed thousands of lives across the nation. Through scholarships, medical research, community development, and educational programs, his foundation has changed countless futures without ever asking for recognition. Please join me in welcoming the Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of Foster Global Enterprises, Mr. Benjamin Foster." Time itself seemed to pause. Ethan instinctively looked toward the ballroom doors one final time, expecting another distinguished businessman to appear. Nothing happened. Slowly, confusion crossed his face as he noticed the photographers lifting their cameras toward the middle of the ballroom instead. Event coordinators smiled with obvious relief. Senior executives standing near the front immediately rose from their chairs. Their attention was fixed on only one person. Benjamin offered Natalie a gentle smile that carried the quiet warmth she already knew so well. "Would you excuse me for a moment?" he asked softly. Natalie answered with complete calm. "Of course." Benjamin buttoned his charcoal jacket with one smooth movement before walking toward the stage. The applause began quietly, then spread across the ballroom in powerful waves. One executive stood, then another. Soon every business leader, sponsor, and honored guest rose to their feet in a standing ovation that filled the room with genuine admiration. Ethan remained frozen where he stood, unable to move as every detail from the evening suddenly rearranged itself inside his mind. The simple watch, the modest conversation, the effortless confidence, the complete lack of self-promotion. None of those qualities had belonged to an ordinary man. Benjamin reached the stage and accepted the microphone with the same humility he had shown from the moment he entered the ballroom. He waited patiently until the applause softened before speaking. "Thank you for your kindness," he began. "I have always believed that true success is measured by the opportunities we create for other people. Businesses may build profits, but people build communities. If we forget the second part, the first one loses its meaning." His words were simple, sincere, and completely free of arrogance. He spoke with the same calm voice Natalie had heard countless times over quiet dinners and morning coffee. There was no dramatic performance because none was necessary. The audience listened with complete attention, not because he demanded it, but because authenticity naturally commanded respect. Madison stared toward the stage with disbelief. She quietly whispered, "Benjamin Foster? The Benjamin Foster?" Ethan could not answer. He had seen that name for years in financial headlines, corporate reports, and business journals displayed in airport lounges. Foster Global Enterprises had become one of the country's most respected business groups, investing in technology, healthcare, infrastructure, and charitable initiatives across multiple states. He suddenly remembered articles praising Benjamin for avoiding unnecessary publicity while quietly expanding one of the largest privately held companies in America. Ethan slowly turned toward Natalie. She had not changed her posture. She had not smiled with satisfaction or looked around waiting for everyone to notice her. She simply watched Benjamin with quiet pride, exactly as someone watches a person they deeply respect rather than someone they wish to display. She had known who he was from the very beginning, and had never once used his success to answer anyone's assumptions. Around the ballroom, whispers spread from table to table as guests realized what had happened. The woman they believed had returned alone had actually arrived beside the most respected man in the room, and she had never felt the need to tell anyone. In that single moment, Ethan understood that the greatest confidence never introduced itself because it never needed permission to be recognized. The applause continued as Benjamin stepped down from the stage, but he accepted every handshake with quiet humility rather than celebration. Board members thanked him personally for supporting the charity. Scholarship recipients lined up to express their gratitude. Volunteers smiled as he remembered several of them by name from previous community projects. Nothing about his behavior changed now that everyone recognized who he was. He spoke with the same warmth he had shown the young server earlier in the evening, proving that respect had never depended on a person's title. Natalie watched him from across the ballroom with peaceful admiration. She had never fallen in love with his success. She had fallen in love with the man who quietly carried groceries for an elderly neighbor without telling anyone, who always remembered birthdays without needing reminders, and who believed listening carefully was more important than speaking loudly. Around them, the atmosphere inside the ballroom had transformed completely. Guests who had barely acknowledged Natalie earlier now approached her with genuine curiosity and sincere respect. They asked about her work, her interests, and how she and Benjamin had met. Natalie answered every question graciously without mentioning his wealth or influence unless someone asked directly. She never acted as though Benjamin's accomplishments somehow belonged to her. That quiet confidence only deepened the admiration people already felt. Ethan remained standing beside Madison, unable to stop replaying the evening inside his mind. His confidence had disappeared without anyone attacking him. Nobody had embarrassed him. Nobody had exposed him. Yet somehow he felt smaller than he had ever felt before. He slowly removed his phone and opened his company's internal employee directory. His fingers hesitated for only a moment before searching for Foster Global Enterprises. The familiar corporate structure appeared on the screen. His division belonged to a regional company that had been acquired 3 years earlier. Above that division stood another holding company. At the very top appeared one name: Benjamin Foster, Chairman and Chief Executive Officer. Ethan stared silently at the screen. He suddenly remembered the quarterly leadership presentations discussing future expansion, executive approvals, and strategic investments that ultimately required authorization from headquarters. The promotion he had been pursuing for months would eventually move through leadership appointed by Benjamin. Madison noticed the color leaving Ethan's face. "What is it?" she asked quietly. He swallowed before answering. "Our company is part of his organization." She looked toward Benjamin in disbelief. "You mean he oversees your entire corporate group?" Ethan nodded slowly. "Yes." The realization settled heavily between them. Benjamin possessed every opportunity to make Ethan feel insignificant, yet he had done exactly the opposite. He had congratulated Ethan on his engagement. He had wished him happiness. He had spoken with kindness from beginning to end. Moments later, Benjamin and Natalie walked toward them. Ethan instinctively straightened his jacket, uncertain whether to apologize for his earlier assumptions or remain silent. Before he could decide, Benjamin extended his hand once more with the same calm smile. "Ethan," he said warmly, "it was a pleasure meeting you this evening. I hope your wedding is everything you both hope it will be." Ethan accepted the handshake almost automatically. Benjamin's grip remained steady, respectful, and completely free of judgment. He never mentioned the promotion, the company structure, or his position. He offered no lesson and no quiet reminder of his influence. When the handshake ended, Benjamin simply returned to Natalie's side. She smiled gently, and together they thanked several organizers before preparing to leave. Ethan watched them in complete silence, finally understanding that genuine greatness never needed to remind anyone how powerful it was. The strongest person in the room had never tried to become the most important one, and the woman he once believed had lost everything had quietly found a life that no longer depended on anyone else's approval. As the evening drew to a close, the ballroom slowly returned to the gentle rhythm of quiet conversations and soft music, yet something invisible had changed forever. The crystal chandeliers still filled the room with warm golden light. The servers continued collecting empty glasses with practiced elegance, and guests exchanged polite farewells as they prepared to leave. Everything looked exactly the same as it had a few hours earlier, but no one inside the ballroom viewed the evening through the same eyes anymore. Ethan stood silently beside one of the tall windows overlooking the city. For the first time in years, he was not thinking about promotions, expensive celebrations, or the admiration of strangers. Instead, his thoughts wandered back to ordinary memories he had forgotten to appreciate while they still belonged to him. He remembered quiet Sunday mornings when Natalie brewed coffee before sunrise because she knew he enjoyed the first cup while reading the newspaper. He remembered handwritten birthday cards she left on the kitchen counter every year without expecting anything in return. He remembered evenings when she patiently waited for him to come home so they could share dinner together, even after her own meal had grown cold. None of those moments had seemed extraordinary at the time. Now they felt priceless. Madison gently touched his arm. "Are you ready to go?" she asked softly. Ethan looked across the ballroom one final time before answering. "In a minute." His voice carried none of the confidence that had filled it earlier that evening. Across the room, Natalie thanked several volunteers for organizing such a meaningful event before helping an elderly guest gather a coat that had slipped from the back of a chair. Benjamin stood nearby, speaking warmly with scholarship students whose lives had been changed through the foundation's support. Despite every eye now recognizing him as one of the country's most respected business leaders, he behaved exactly as he had when he first walked through the ballroom doors. There was no difference between the unknown guest and the celebrated executive because he had never depended on recognition to define his character. Natalie walked toward him with a peaceful smile. "Are you ready?" she asked. Benjamin nodded. "Whenever you are." Without attracting attention, they thanked the event organizers, wished several guests a pleasant evening, and quietly made their way toward the grand entrance. Benjamin naturally opened the door for Natalie before they stepped outside into the cool evening air. The city skyline stretched before them, its countless lights reflecting across nearby buildings like stars scattered beneath the night sky. A modest black sedan waited at the curb. It was comfortable, practical, and completely ordinary. Benjamin opened the passenger door with the same thoughtful courtesy he had shown throughout the evening. Before getting inside, Natalie paused for one brief moment and looked back through the ballroom windows. She could still see familiar faces talking beneath the chandeliers, including Ethan standing silently near the glass. There was no bitterness in her heart, no desire to prove anything, no satisfaction in watching someone else feel regret. She simply smiled, not because anyone had finally recognized her worth, but because she had discovered it long before this evening began. She stepped into the car, and Benjamin quietly closed the door before taking his place behind the wheel. The sedan pulled away smoothly, disappearing into the city lights without fanfare. Inside the ballroom, Ethan continued watching until the taillights faded into the distance. In that quiet moment, he understood that success was never measured by the size of a diamond, the title on a business card, or the applause inside a crowded room. The greatest loss of his life had been failing to recognize the value of the woman who had loved him long before anyone cared about status or appearances. Natalie had never returned to reclaim the past. She had returned because she had already built a future that no longer needed it. She did not win by making someone else lose. She won because she found peace, protected her dignity, and finally became the person she had always deserved to be.